Sometimes, the game doesn't live up to the hype.
And this one was over before it started, folks.
But that doesn't mean there's nothing worth talking about.
They've still shot over 80% from the charity stripe.
One man embraces this moment.
You don't find this exciting? Do me a favor, check your pulse.
Armed with the freedom to analyze, critique, and talk about anything.
What is the best sports movie of all time? I've decided.
Providing you the insight of game day, even if your team isn't playing.
Just a bit outside.
This is the Blowout Podcast with your host, Ty Schwartzlow.
You tried the corner and missed. Hello again, and thank you for joining me for another edition of the Blowout Podcast. I am your host and producer, Ty Schwartzlow. Today we've got a special archive episode from the archives, I guess you could say. This episode was recorded on April 10th, but we're just posting it now. I think most of the information is certainly relevant, and it's with the voice of HBC Sports as well as the host of Prep Time, Justin Barrientos. And we talk mainly about the Winona State basketball programs, and I've got a couple of updates before we get started. And first and foremost is the three players that committed to Winona State. We talk a little bit about some of the incoming players, and I'd like to give an update now that the signing day has come and gone, and that is Nick Shanks from Plainview Elgin Millville. We got the chance to cover him here at HBC, so if you saw him during any of our broadcasts, you certainly know what he can bring to the table. And then there's also Charlie Kuntz out of Minneapolis, who averaged 24 points and 12 rebounds per game in his senior season, so certainly a talented ball player. And then a Division I transfer from the University of Nebraska, Tim Wagner, the sharpshooter, teamed up with current WSU player Riley Bambenik, so you've got some chemistry there, and certainly some talent, as we did mention, but you certainly get some more specific idea of exactly who will be on the floor. And then on the sideline, there's going to be some changes, and Tom Brown accepted the position as the West Texas A&M head coach, so congratulations to him as he looks to make a name for himself in the head coaching role after great success. And that's actually one of the things we talk about with Justin is the coaching staff and the assistants and how they can really help and have played into the success of Mike Leaf and this program. And then replacing Tom Brown will be Zach Malvick after a storied career as the point guard at Winona State through some of the championship years that we actually will talk about throughout this episode. Malvick played for 3 years professionally in Australia, and then last season he was the assistant coach at St. Mary's University. So he's a very accomplished player, as well as it sounds like an up-and-coming coach, and it certainly is very good and very exciting, at least from the Winona State fans that I have talked to. Very excited to have him on board, although it's unfortunate to lose a guy like Tom Brown. But without any further ado, I'll give you a quick rundown of exactly what you'll be listening to with Mr. Barrientos. And we start things off with his unlikely coverage of mixed martial arts, and we don't talk about that for too long, and then we move into Winona State basketball, the men's program, the championship years, including a memorable 2008 Central Region final. Justin talks about this past season, including some uncertainty with both of the programs and how some of the adversity they faced this season could really help propel them to future success. Justin gives a little bit of his insight on the rivalry that is ongoing with Minnesota State Mankato, as well as a prior rivalry to Northern State that's cooled down in recent years, but it sounds like was quite right at the same level as the Mankato one is now. So it's good to have his perspective, as obviously I wasn't around during that time. And then we also talk about some past Warriors going back multiple decades, not just the championship years. There's been some success around the program, certainly dating well before 2005. And we also talk about halfway through, we shift into the WSU women's program, including the highlight of this past season. It was the senior night, incredibly memorable. Stay tuned for that. And then we talk a little bit about Scott Ballard and the program as a whole, including next season, the future. But Justin's a great voice. You'll hear an incredible statistic about just how ingrained in this Winona State basketball program. So this is just the first archive episode, just bear with some of the glitches and maybe hiccups. Was one of the first episodes that we did record, so this is going to be the Winona State centric one, and we'll also have a St. Mary's one, a St. Mary's centric podcast here that we recorded in the past, but certainly think it is still relevant, so stay tuned for that. But without further ado, here is Justin Barrientos. With that, I'd like to welcome into the show someone who has helped me tremendously throughout my career, if you want to call it that, Justin Barrientos. And, do you want to give the statistics, or would you like me to? A little bit about your background.
No, go ahead.
This is a man with covering 7 different sports here at HBC, 586 live events, and here today, it's right in his wheelhouse. That is the Winona State basketball programs. How about this? 135 men's games and 105 women's games. Fair to say you know a little bit about the Winona State basketball programs?
A little bit, yeah. First game that I did for Winona State was in 2001, so it's been 13 years that I've been doing this.
So you know a little bit of everything, but you're certainly not limited to the basketball. What's the most out of your comfort zone you've been in terms of broadcasting something live?
I did an MMA event, the only MMA fight that we have ever done here at HBC. That was a couple years ago, and actually I had to think about it, whether I really wanted to do it or not, because I'm not a big MMA fight watcher, in the first place. But I knew that I could do sort of play-by-play as long as I had someone that would be a color announcer that knew the sport in and out, knew the fighters that we were going to be seeing, and we did. Shannon Olson was the guy that was the color announcer with me, and he was a huge MMA fan, and really helped me out a lot to understand what the sport was all about, and what was going to be happening, and walked me through a lot of what was going on. And it ended up being a very good event. I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but if we had it here on HBC, I'd probably do it again.
It's certainly that experience I can identify with just in hockey. Growing up, not a huge hockey fan, obviously not a professional team in the state of Wisconsin, but just to find the person who really is an expert, I think, is the real key. And I learned that from you. But Justin, let's start. We'll start with the men's basketball program, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the history, a little bit of background. We talked. You've been here since 2001, covering on and off this program. Well, I'm just a junior here. I've been here since 2011, so I missed not only some of the prime peak years, but I've certainly missed a lot of history. So, Justin, we could start really anywhere, but what is your best experience or the memory that sticks out to you in terms of the men's basketball program?
I think it's probably any of the championship years. And I guess I would probably say the biggest one would be the 2008 Central Region Final, which was equivalent to the Sweet 16 in the NCAA Division I tournament. It was the game that sent them to the Elite Eight. And it was the second time that I was able to broadcast that particular game, third time I'd witnessed it, because in 2006 we had hired another company to actually have the announcers to do it. Okay. I was actually running camera for the 2006. So this was the third one that I had seen, and we had also brokered a deal to get the game simulcast on Fox Sports North. So it was huge to have Winona on FSN here to see that Winona State game, and it didn't disappoint. They beat Minnesota State Mankato, go on to the Elite Eight, and eventually win their second national championship.
I'm just going through some of the archives here at HBC. I've seen a number of some things that we've done here at HBC, as well as some other news outlets, and I think you put it best in that it was really an event. Winona State basketball was an event throughout the community. Talk to me about what that's like, and maybe to people like myself who are students at WSU, what is the difference between what we've got now and that event?
Well, during those years, I mean, that was the thing to go to, like you said, an event. It was packed. The stands were full. It was really standing room only. The student section really came out, and you had the McCowan Maniacs on the side of the court, which was just incredible. And everybody just seemed to really come together for that sort of thing. The gym was so loud you could barely hear yourself. I know that we had kind of strained our voices trying to talk over the crowd. With our headphones on and with everything that was around us, we could still hear everything that was going on. And so that was just incredible. And to see that level of basketball being played in your backyard was just incredible.
The thing that really struck me, Justin, is one of the bigger games of my career, again, I use the term loosely, would be the Mankato matchup. Yeah. Winona State hosted them. the environment was unbelievable. Mankato traveled well. They were very well represented. I asked you, Justin, where does this compare to the peak? If it's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, most unbelievable atmosphere, you said it was a 6. Now, this was something that I had been really hyping up, at least individually, to be able to cover, and to find out that it didn't quite meet what it could be just blew me away, Justin. And I don't necessarily have a question for this part, but what do you think? What do you think it will take to get back to that point? And that this makes it sound as if I'm critiquing the Winona State community, and that's not at all, because the success of the program, I think if you get to that level, is it as simple as finding that consistent success to get it back to an event?
I think so. I think, a lot of it has to do with the players, and a lot of it has to do with how well they go from year to year. And I think that this year, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but this year was really a surprise, because I know I had talked to Coach Leaf before the season started, and they were ranked in the top 25 preseason, and that was kind of a surprise to all of us who had watched the program, because Clayton Vetty was gone. So
he was really good.
What do you do to replace him?
Exactly.
And then what do you do with the young players that you had? They had a smaller roster this year than they had ever had in the past, so the bench wasn't all that deep. They did have the one red shirt. So, you didn't really know what you were going to have out on the court. And he said, a lot of it is name recognition. A lot of those preseason polls, people haven't seen all the schools yet, so you don't know, exactly who's going to be in that top 25. But it ended up that they had a really good season. And, getting to the championship game of the region was just incredible for this program. And to think what's coming up ahead, I think this program is going to get back to where it was in 2006, 2007, 2008 in the next year, maybe 2 years.
I think that that certainly as a fan, you've got to be excited about the future going forward. And as a current student, again, like myself, that's kind of the reason we're having this is if you're a student at WSU and you missed out on the championship years, this is a great way to potentially prepare for some more, as well as learn a little bit about the history of potentially your school. Now, how do you measure the team's success given the history, given winning streaks, national titles? There's a lot of success. How do you measure a successful season for this program, Justin?
Well, I think it's hard. You want to go by wins. You want to go by having a team that competes game in and game out, and they're going to be in it all the time. And with this team, it's difficult because they have the 2 national championships and went to 3 straight national championship games. So that sets the bar pretty high right there. But this season, getting to the 20-win plateau, I think it's the 10th or 11th time in a row that Winona State has reached 20 wins in a season. That's where you start the benchmark, and then to be able to compete in the playoffs and, like I said, get to the Central Region Championship game, which they did this year, I think is pretty good. And, they have so many NCAA appearances coming in. They started in 2005, and they made it every year until 2011. 2012 they skipped, and then the last 2 years they've made it again to the NCAA tournament. So it's either 20 wins or it's making that NCAA tournament.
To me, the way I measure the success is, are you a team to be reckoned with in the postseason? And can you be playing at your best towards the end? And at least the few years and what I've seen, generally Winona State is a team to be reckoned with now. We'll talk about a little bit later. The Skylar O'Laughlin injury, I would argue, had a little bit of impact on potentially where this year's team would go. But Justin, I want to go, before we talk about this year's team, is go back to the past, the championship years. Let's just talk about the personnel. A couple of names that I know didn't get to see watch play is John Smith and Jonte Flowers. Tell me about those two specifically and what they did for this community and this basketball program.
Well, John Smith, 2-year Player of the Year in the NCAA Division II. I think that kind of says it all right there. But just an amazing rebounder, amazing shot blocker, amazing player. You did not want to go into the paint if you were an offense coming in. You also did not want to guard him in the paint if you were a defense coming in. So he could control the game by himself. However, he had this amazing supporting cast, and you talked about Jonte Flowers. There's also Quincy Henderson and Kurtrell Robinson and Zach Malvick and David Zellman and David Johnson. The names go on and on and on. Travis Whipple. I'm going to leave out some names there. But there were so many people that were also key to that success. Jonte Flowers could control the tempo of a game just because of the way that he played on defense. I think he was Defensive Player of the Year.
4 years.
Right. holds the steals record at Winona State. I mean, he could pickpocket an opposing point guard or anybody else so quickly, and then to take that ball and go down the court. I mean, you saw the windmill dunk.
The fast break stuff is what really stuck out to me on film.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact that he could take the ball away from the other team and then turn that into points on the other end. And that wasn't the only part of his game. I mean, he was a great outside shooter. He could take the ball inside.
He had 40 points in the game, didn't he?
Yeah, he had 40 points once, which was just incredible. So, he did everything that he could. Both of those players really could control a game, as could any of the supporting cast, and that's why they got to 3 national title games.
All right, let's talk now a little bit about head coach Mike Leaf. Now, you have a unique relationship with Coach Leaf. Tell me, when did you first meet the man himself?
In grade school, because he was a Phi Ed teacher at St. Stan's grade school while I was a student. So he was my Phi Ed teacher for 2 years, I think it was. And, no one knew that he was going to be a great basketball coach after that. But I think that not too long after that, he was an assistant on the Winona State basketball team when Jerry Nauman was head coach. But he doesn't. He remembers it, and he doesn't shy away from telling anybody else that's in the gym at the time. Hey, I taught him. He was in my class. So that that's fun to have that kind of connection.
Well, with a Coach Leaf, you obviously have seen him for a lot more extended of a period. I have kind of a sense of what he's all about, what he believes in. But tell me about his system. Has that changed since his championship run? Talk to me about the balance between changing your system based on personnel and changing your core beliefs.
Well, I don't think it's changed a whole lot. I think if you have a strong three-point shooting team, you're going to change in that way. If you have a strong inside presence, like you had with John Smith, like you had with Clayton Vetty, obviously you go to that more. But I think that the whole philosophy really hasn't changed all that much because of the consistency in the coaching staff. Mike Leaf has been head coach 16 years, but he's also had Tom Brown and Chris Gove as assistant coaches for all those 16 years. And Brown and Gove were players while Mike Leaf was an assistant coach. So, I mean, they have, 2+ decades.
Talk about
together.
Being on the same page.
Right, exactly. And so I think that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and there's really no question about where they're going to be as a program. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's something that they don't have to worry about, but it's something that they know where everybody is going to be, and they know where everybody's coming from and where their mindset is and what everybody's role is, who's going to be the recruiter, who's going to be the one breaking down game film, who's going to be the one preparing the plays. In that sense, it's been that way for 20+ years, and it's worked. And he's the all-time winningest head coach in Winona State history, moving up the all-time NCAA charts. It's just incredible what they've had.
And I hesitate to make any NBA type of comparisons, but I think it illustrates how important consistency in having that same voice is in the game of basketball, and it's the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah.
Greg Popovich talked to him about Tim Duncan and some of his players about how much knowing the coach's system certainly pays off. And Justin, the Minnesota State Mankato rivalry is, since I've gotten here, I think been one of the bigger events, spectacles, whatever you want to call it, in my time here. I certainly think of the Elite Eight, or the trip to the Elite Eight, Clayton Vetty's senior year. But you were telling me that there's always been a rival with Winona State, but it hasn't always been Mankato. Tell me, who was pre-Mankato, if you want to call it
Yeah,
that?
It was Northern State before that. And, Mankato was always in there. It was kind of always in the mix. But for the first couple of years in the championship runs, it was Northern State. That was really their main rival, because it seemed like they would always get them in the NSIC tournament or even in the NCAA tournament. But, both of those teams just have been really great rivals. And I think that it also helps that most of the teams in the NSIC have been very competitive, very tough teams. I mean, you really can't go into any game and take any of those off, because the level of competition in this conference, I think, is better than any other conference in Division II.
Well, I think of I believe it was the University of Mary NSIC tournament game a couple years ago. Winona State hosting, much higher seed, and Mary came to play, and they were very close. I believe there might have had the lead at the half, but certainly proves the point of that level of the familiarity. And Justin, I guess my next question is, how much of that is a healthy dislike? Obviously, Winona and Mankato, the two communities don't necessarily love each other, but how much of that is due to the fact of how much is on the line playing in these important games year after year?
Well, I think it's a lot, because I mean, if you look at the history, I think Winona State has stood in the way of so many other schools because they've all had really good teams. Like I said, Northern State and Minnesota State, Mankato. I think if Winona State hadn't been in the conference, either one of those schools could have also had national championships. So in that sense, yeah, there is that kind of, don't want to say hatred, but or jealousy or anything like that. Healthy dislike. That's a good way to say it. But I think that if those teams weren't at that level, then maybe Winona State wouldn't have been at that level either, because they were battle tested in the NSIC before they got to the NCAA tournament.
That's a very good point. And with that, I'm hesitant to move on to this year's season. Justin, is there anything that we didn't cover? Certainly, if you were to be telling anybody that wasn't there in person about, we're calling them the championship years, but certainly not limited to that, but about this program in general.
Well, there's a lot of history besides what we've just seen in the last 13, 14 years. There were so many great players that put on the Warrior uniform before 2005 that, we talk about John Smith and Jonte Flowers and all these players before, but there's a Gus Johnson, there's a Carter Glad.
Look at the stats, people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at what Gus Johnson did in the 70s, and I mean, they made the NCAA tournament a couple years during the time that he was there, but they don't have the championship banners, so that's why it kind of gets lost in the history. You don't hear about that very much. But Carter Glad was another one in the late 80s that was a really big scorer. He put up a lot of numbers, but unfortunately it didn't really convert into championships or anything like that. And I think, unfortunately, that's what you're ranked on. That's what you're remembered for. And so, it's easy to remember the John Smith and all of those players. But look back in the books. You're absolutely right. Look back at the numbers and who has been there. Take a look at the plaques on the wall in the Hall of Fame and that sort of thing, and you'll realize just how good of a program this has been over the years.
And I think that some of that gets lost. Mike Leaf can't necessarily come in and build a program, and that's taking nothing away, but you need to get that program. It's all part of a process. And Justin, I'm going to shift it now to a little bit less pleasant topic, at least for some Winona State fans. I want to know two things. Okay. The winning streak, tell me what was the highlight of that, and then obviously the championship game. Contrast that. How did that feel as a Winona State fan to watch everything kind of fall apart there towards the end with so much at stake?
Yeah, you're talking about the Barton game.
Yes, the Barton game, of course.
Yeah, it's difficult because they had won the year before, and then you get to the title game again, and it looks like it's in hand, and then all of a sudden it just kind of slips away at the end, and you have the unfortunate ball handling mistake at the end that turns into a layup that turns into a loss. And it's deflating, but at the same time, I mean, I was reminded by Eric Lear, former a colleague of ours who's now in Rochester, that when we were in North Carolina covering the Winona State baseball team as they made their run in the national championship that year, I had seen a poster at the airport for Barton University, and I kind of gave it a dirty look while I was looking at it. And he said, well, what's that all about? And I said, well, it's the loss to Barton. And he says, you guys won two. Why are you upset about that? You have two national championships. I said, but it could have been a third.
It means so much.
It could have been that dynasty. Not that it isn't still with the loss, but it could have been 3 in a row instead of 2 out of 3.
In the part that, at least from the outsider's perspective, is who knows? You win that game, what happens next year? Now, that's all pushed to the side burner and not important at this point, but I think it's worth mentioning. If you're not familiar with it, it is one of the greatest finishes that I have seen, most unbelievable. Certainly, it doesn't make it any easier for a Winona State fan to watch, but if you're a student, I would encourage you check up on not only some of the great moments of the winning streak and some of the banners that you see throughout McCowan, but do a little research and potentially prepare yourself for what could be around the corner, and that I mean potentially some deep tournament runs. And I think that's the perfect segue, Justin, to talk about this past season. And I think we've got to start it with those Mankato games. You talk about a team coming through, and I'm talking about the regular season matchups. Yeah. I can only talk about the one that I was at home. We've mentioned it. Boy, they came out and behind the enthusiasm of a home crowd, really played what I think was one of their better games. Was that the highlight of this season for the Warriors, or would that be where you think they were playing some of their best basketball?
Yeah, I think so. I think both of those games where they beat Minnesota State when they were nationally ranked, anytime that anybody comes in nationally ranked, I mean, they got a target on their back. Winona State knows that better than anybody else. But yeah, I think that those games were big, and you're referencing the one that was at Winona State, and it was great atmosphere. It's probably the best atmosphere that I've seen since the big runs in 2006.
Definitely in my time at WSU.
Absolutely. And so that gives you hope that it can happen again, and that you'll see full gyms once again, especially with some of the players that are coming in. But I think that would probably be the highlights of the season, just because they were nationally ranked for a time, preseason top 25, and then later on, then they lost a couple games and built themselves back up to get back in the national rankings, and then they lose a couple of games again and dip down. So it was kind of an up and down season, but at the same time, like I said, they didn't expect to really be there this year. And so I think that all of that put together put for a memorable season, but you do kind of wonder what would have been if some of the injuries didn't happen. You alluded to Skylar O'Laughlin.
It's very easy for me to think of a situation, because even with the O'Laughlin injury, they're sitting number 1 in the regional ranking, in the driver's seat to host. Yeah. And they are upset by Augustana, and certainly some great post play on the Augustana's part.
Yeah.
So you got to think O'Laughlin would make an impact. How much is up for debate, but certainly now that we are removed from the season, I can certainly look back, and I think you make the great point about they weren't expected to necessarily be in that point. I think it's more of a testament of how much they exceeded expectations even to get to that point, more so than the disappointment of Augustana. How do you think that game goes if O'Laughlin is in there? And I hate to go just a one-game type of thing. O'Laughlin injury in general, on the court, what type of an impact did that make?
Well, it was hard because they didn't have that shot blocker, that inside presence. Remember, when he was healthy, he was one of the top shot blockers in the conference. I think he averaged 2 shot blocks per game, something like that. And so that propelled the team to be one of the best shot blocking teams in the NSIC. But one other thing to remember is that there's more than just that Skylar O'Laughlin injury. You had Taylor Cameron, who was hurt too.
Easy.
He missed a lot of time, and he was the heart and soul of that team, not only on the court but off the court as well, because he was the clear leader. You talk to anybody on that team and they say they deferred to Taylor Cameron because he had been there as a senior. He had gutted out so many different games with so many other injuries, and then it was hard to have him sit or be limited. I think in that Augustana game he might have come in the second half for just a little bit.
It wasn't
a little fuzzy on that one.
The Taylor Cameron that we were certainly used to seeing, and I think injuries, it's a little bit of a theme for both of these programs in a sense, in that they had to overcome some adversity that as a coach you obviously don't want to have to overcome. But I think that having some of those injuries, having some of that adversity, having an Augustana team come in a very important game, I think that's going to serve them well going into the future. Now, you could probably attest to that a lot better. What does it look like when a team is building towards that process of potentially getting to the mountaintop, I'm going to call it?
Well, you talk about all the youth that they have on the team this year and coming into the future. I mean, you remember Riley Bamanick's young. I mean, he was just a freshman this year, redshirt freshman, so he's got 3 more years left. You have a Kyle Bauman, you have a Nick Arns, you have Josh Mongan. You have all these players. Isaiah Gray also got some playing time as well. And I think that the injuries this season is actually going to help the team in the next couple of years, because these players are able to get more playing time on the court now and see what the competition is going to be like in the future. Because one of the other recurring things when you talk to these players is the difference between the high school game and the college game, and how hard it is to make that transition, even when you're a redshirt like Riley Bamanick was, and he got to sit for a whole season and watch and see what the speed was like and the difference. You don't get quite that sense when you're just playing in practice. You have to get on the court in order to find that out. And we saw Riley Bamanick, have a couple of at the beginning of the season, maybe not play to the expectations that we had when he first came in, because we all saw him at in high school. But then after that, he was able to come in and able to really put up some great numbers and lead the team in scoring this year. So I think that's going to serve them well. Like I said, the bench is obviously going to be a lot better next year because they got that playing time. You wonder who is going to be the player that's going to step up, who is going to be that kind of leader now that Kellen Taylor and Taylor Cameron are going to be gone. you want it to be Skylar O'Laughlin, but then you also have these other younger players who can definitely take the team on their shoulders, like Riley Bamanek and Nick Arns and some of these other players. So I think that the future is bright for Winona State, especially with some of the recruits that are coming in. We know Nick Shanks is going to be on the team. He's probably going to sit this next year. I won't put any words in Mike Leaf's mouth, but I would imagine that they would want him for a full 4 years, and so maybe they'll have him be mentored by Skylar O'Laughlin, like O'Laughlin was from Clayton Vetty.
We saw how valuable that was.
Yeah, absolutely. So, watch this team in the next couple of years. They'll be really good.
And certainly, I've said it before, you're pretty much the beat writer, so to speak, of HBC Sports in terms of that program. Nobody's got a better pulse in turn. I guess I would be the beat writer, so to call, for the women's side of the program. And I got to see firsthand just the number of injuries that this team had to go through this season. And I think we have to start off with the senior class and Abby Busch, especially with 39 points, record-breaking performance on senior day. But Justin, what's the one thing that sticks out to you around this program as this year goes? Is it the injuries? Is it the adversity?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. I think when you had talked to Scott Ballard earlier in the season, and he talked about the missing time at point guard, being on the third point guard that they used, and you kind of feel bad talking about somebody that way because you still have some great players, but when you have Tessa Wells go down and you have some other players go down, that really hurts. You saw how much Tessa Wells meant to the team when she took the court for the final game, just to be there for tip-off and
it was
have one more chance to put on the Warrior uniform and be out there. That's incredible. But injuries definitely hurt this team, and it was disappointing because you had seen Scott Ballard take a team that had a lot of walk-ons in his first season, and you saw him build and build and build, and they seemed to get better and better every year. And to take a step back, if that's what you want to call this season, it's a little tough. But again, they have some bright spots too, and some other players that'll come and step up.
And you certainly knew going into this season, having lost the seniors that they did lose, it was going to be a process. But certainly the injuries, and again, I don't want to make too big of a deal of that, but for a little bit of background, you've got senior point guard Tessa Wells, who goes down in practice, and it's one of the worst kinds of injuries, a concussion. Not only the uncertainty that goes along with that, but it ended up actually finishing her season. So all of a sudden, you've got Connor Nagel, a sophomore, who is just beginning to really exceed and not exceed, but really get comfortable in her role as a shooter, as a two-guard, and then she's forced to go to the point guard position and did a good job, but it was a work in progress, and I give a lot of credit to Scott Ballard and that coaching staff, as well as the seniors, to keep that team together, and they certainly had some highlights. I remember the St. Cloud game especially sticking out. Boy, you talk about a game where a team really rallies together. Same exact thing, Augustana senior day. What was your highlight for this women's basketball program, Justin?
I think it was probably the one big game that Connor Nagel had, where she knocked down all those 3-point shots and just really, she tried to put the team on her back. I think they lost that game.
It was a 1-point loss, yeah.
Right. And, she did everything that she could. And I think that in that game, Abby Busch was kind of held back a little bit. They didn't get the production that they usually saw from Abby Busch. So the fact that all season long we were looking for a second scorer, and they never really got that. It was one person that really stood out throughout every game, whether it was Abby Busch or whether it was Connor Nagel or somebody else. They only had that one main offensive weapon, and they just needed something else to come in. But again, it was the injuries. It was all the decimation in the team that allowed that prevented them from having that second scorer.
I can remember the game you're talking about. Connor Nagel, I believe it was her second game in the point guard role after the Tessa Wells injury. And Winona State, they were clinging to, I believe it was a single-digit lead throughout the second half. You could see they didn't quite have the depth to match, and that lead just slowly shrinks and shrinks. A couple of huge shots in the last minute, and it was one of the more heartbreaking losses that I have ever been around. But I think that's, as bad as it sounds, a little bit of the story of their season. Yeah, that's not ideal. There's certainly some things from that game as well as this season you can take away, and I think that, again, they're going to be able to use that to propel them forward, and I can expect some big things. I've heard Scott Ballard mention in a couple of interviews, hey, there's a lot of teams around the NSIC that had a lot of senior experience going to be losing some of that going forward. So all of a sudden, maybe the tables are turned. Winona State a little bit more prepared on their end. But Justin, I do want to talk to you about the women's program, some great memories that you have as well about this program. And I think we should start 2008, the Sweet 16 game you had the privilege of seeing. Tell me about that.
Well, that was 2009. It was actually that game. Yeah, it was actually the NSIC tournaments. They played. Everybody played, the first round on their home court, and then you were able to host if you were the top seed going after that. And Winona State came into that one, the 2 seed, and I think it was Minnesota State Mankato was the number 1 seed. So here we go again with Minnesota State Mankato. But Winona State ends up winning that first game, and they need the top seed to lose to the number 8 seed. How improbable is that?
Yeah.
Even in the NSIC where the teams are really tough. It happened, but they didn't know that right away. They won their game, and they were all excited about that game, and then they just wanted to know, did Minnesota State lose? Or did they win? Are we going to have to go to Mankato, or are we going to have this here? And the men, I think, had already wrapped up hosting the conference tournament at that point, and so you knew that you would have Winona State men hosting. You would love to have the women host as well. And so after the game was done, we were doing our post-game show, and we're trying to stay on as long as we could so we could give the fans, an idea of what was going on in Mankato as well. And then a couple of the players come out of the locker room, and they kind of stand behind us, and they're looking at the live stats that we're looking at and the live scores coming in, and they're waiting to see what happened.
Were they quiet, or were they cheering?
No, they were quiet. I mean, you could hear a little noises, little squeals, anticipation as the score was rolling on and the clock was winding down, and it was really exciting to be a part of that, because it felt like we were part of the team then, standing there as the announcers wrapping up that game. But and that was neat to see. And then when it finally happened that Minnesota State Mankato lost, they knew it, and you could feel the excitement behind you. You couldn't really look; you were concentrating on what you were doing on the air. But that was a special moment to me, just to know that how much they cared about the program and how much they wanted to host, and they ended up hosting. And unfortunately, they lost to the 6th-seeded St. Cloud State, who went on to win the tournament on Winona State's floor, which is a little difficult, but still a great moment.
Okay, with that, we've got a couple other things that jump out to me, at least in my time covering the women's basketball program. That's Becca Frieslaben's record-breaking 9 3-point shots in a game. You were on the call for it. Tell me, what was that like to be in the building for that?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, we knew that Becca Friesleben was a great 3-point shooter. Katie Wolf was also a great 3-point shooter on that team as well. But it just seemed like she couldn't miss. And when it got closer and closer, you pull out the record book and you flip through it and you see, well, what is the record here? And
you were on the ball very early, if I recall.
Yeah, well, yeah, I saw that. And I think that was because Katie Wolf had gotten close before, or maybe it was even Becca Friesleben had gotten close before. So we knew kind of in our heads what the record was. And then it ended up that Becca Friesleben was close to the single game scoring record too, because with all the 3-pointers, then she ended up with 31 points, which was just 5 off of the school record. So that was neat too, to be close to that and to see that happen. But it turned, and the other thing about that game that we knew was that her dad was in the crowd, and her dad rarely missed a game. He was always there. And
We've interviewed him. He is a dedicated fan. Yeah. I can attest to that.
Absolutely. So every once in a while we get the reaction shot from her dad as she would hit another 3-point shot. And so that, again, another really special moment.
And you mentioned the career record for points in a game. Well, Abby Busch holds that record now, and it was because of an unbelievable senior day. Justin, I think it exemplified her career perfectly. You saw her outside shooting ability, but you also saw her ability to get into the paint, get to the line, a bunch of old-fashioned 3-point plays. Yeah. What do you remember about Abby Busch's performance?
Well, I just remember how gutty it was, because here you are at the end of the season. It's a disappointing season. There really wasn't much to play for. However, you had at the beginning of the game Tessa Wells come out, and you had the emotion already there. And so I think that not only was it a game for Abby Busch to play as a senior, but a game that she played for Tessa Wells. You play for the team, you play for Coach Ballard. There was just so much emotion in that one. And when she got close to the record, and again, you pull out the record book and you think, boy, she's got to be close to this. and then to actually see it happen, and to know that maybe you were one of the only people that knew that that was happening in the gym was pretty neat, because I don't know how many of the fans realized that she was that close, or even went over the mark, but it was a very special moment.
It's about the only time I can use this cliche, so I will do so. You couldn't have scripted it any better.
Right.
You really couldn't have. It began with the emotion of the Tessa Wells being in that starting lineup, but I will say this, I hesitate to say whether I've ever seen a team want to win a game as badly as they did, and given the context of the season, that really impresses me and says a lot about that team's mindset. And I want to talk a little about Coach Ballard as well. We talked about Coach Leaf. For some students who may not be quite as familiar with Coach Scott Ballard, tell me a little bit about what makes him tick. What makes him an effective coach?
Well, he relates so well to the players, I think, because there's a mix of humor. There's a mix of basketball knowledge that he has, having coached in high school and also coaching in college. He has 100+ career wins at every stop that he's been at in college, and one of the all-time great coaches in NCAA Division II. But he makes the players laugh during practice, and he's interesting to be around. I remember that for the first couple of years that Ballard was the coach at Winona State, our broadcast setup was right by the Winona State bench. And so we would hear what he was saying to the referees. We would hear what he was saying to the players. We would hear him all throughout the game. And it was all that we could do to not break out laughing during the game, because he's very entertaining. And I mean, firsthand.
No, he has a great way of, he'll let you know his opinion, but it's still in just that, it's still respectful, but it's still like, hey, come on, you're not helping my cause at all. And it's that maybe it's where he's from. You could certainly be able to tell us, having dealt with him a little bit more, but it's just that mix of respect, as well as, hey, no, I'm not going to let you get away with something if I feel like you missed a call.
Right, exactly. So. And it to show that he's got the players' backs too. I mean, that's the important thing. And the way that he's able to make changes during games, I think, is also good too. It was a little bit tough this season because there wasn't as much on the bench that he could bring into a game. There wasn't a whole lot that he could do to change the situation. And he's another one like Coach Leaf that they like to have the same starting lineup out there on the floor. They like to have the same personnel that flow together and play together really well. And so I think that kind of added to the difficult season. But, the other thing about Coach Ballard is that he's so accessible as a coach. I mean, you can go and talk to him. And I remember when we used to have the coaches show here on HBC, you ask him a couple of questions and you fill the segment, because he has so much passion for the game, and he's so willing to talk and to tell you about the players, and he wants you to know about them, and he wants you to understand where everybody is coming from. That it's really neat to see that. And then, of course, you had the commercial that we did promoting Winona State basketball, myself and Eric Lear at Hy-Vee with Scott Ballard. And I don't know how many coaches would agree to do something like that, but it was great that he wanted to do it, and he, even when he read the script and knew what he had to do, okay, let's go for it.
Just the natural way that commercial came across, it baffles me, and to this day, one of the greatest things I think HBC has been responsible for. And going back to the accessibility of Coach Ballard, it's something that has helped me as getting into this whole media aspect. There have been countless times where, to put it quite frankly, I have been off base. I have completely been wrong about something, and instead of being like, well, no, you're, and leading me to believe, Coach Ballard will straight up say, no. He'll do it in a very respectful way again, but he will take the time to make sure that you understand as a media member that is extremely beneficial to me. And Justin, we've got a couple more minutes left. I just want to finish off. You have mentioned, we talked to the top, the number of 7 different sporting events, kinds of sporting events, that is, as well as 586 live events.
Yeah.
What's the one event that sticks out most?
The 2008 Winona State men's basketball game, the Sweet 16 game. I think that just the fact that, that was the senior season for John Smith and Jonte Flowers and Quincy Henderson, and I think Kurtrell Robinson was also on that team. I think maybe Travis Whipple was on that team. To know that all those players were playing on the Winona State court for the last time. They would head off to Massachusetts for the Elite Eight. To see them win again, to see them beat Minnesota State Mankato, to have that crowd there, to have the McAllen Maniacs there, I don't know if I'll ever have an experience quite like that, because there is so many people. I mean, the gym was packed. It was so loud. The emotion that was there for the whole thing. I think that's probably going to be a highlight for my whole career, because I mean, it was the school I went to. It's my alma mater. It's my hometown, and everything just kind of aligning and coming together to propel them to a win and see them off. That was just great.
Okay, and conversely, what is, I hesitate to call it the worst moment about this job, because there really are no worst moment, but is there a time where you're at a game, you're like, what on earth am I doing? It hit me as I'm announcing a hockey game. I'm not a hockey expert. What on earth? And you get through it. But is there a moment for you where you're like, maybe you even pinch yourself as, holy cow, I'm getting here paid to watch sports and do something I love. Is that something that ever crossed your mind?
Every time. I mean, I have the best seats in the house, 586 times, and more next season and more maybe this season, depending on what it is that we're doing. The fact that I'm able to get into the gyms and talk to the coaches and talk to the players, we talked about the accessibility of Scott Ballard, but really that's Winona wide. You talk to St. Mary's, you talk Winona State, you talk any of the high schools, their willingness to come in and talk to us, and the access that we get to the players and the coaches and everything is just incredible, and it makes our jobs so much easier to be able to tell the stories and to be able to come up with something on air that maybe people haven't heard of before, and to know the backstories about everything. It's just incredible, and yeah, there's really no bad day on the job when you're doing these games. I mean, I remember when the Central Region tournaments were in Winona, and we would do 4 games in one night, and it seems like a grind, but at the same time, I mean, you're so amped up, and the energy is there from all the different games that it doesn't feel like work, and that's the best part about it.
4 games in one day.
Yeah,
that's the most.
And I've done that twice.
Day. You've done it twice.
Yeah.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Barrientos, I would like to thank you, sir, for joining the Blowout podcast. Certainly have taught me a number of different things, and I'm hoping will continue to teach me. We'll see how he thinks this podcast turned out. But thank you, Justin, for being on the program, and we look forward to seeing continued sports coverage not only this summer. You can check out your show, Prep Time.
Yep.
You can follow yourself on Twitter. Hey, anything else you want to plug?
I don't think so. I think that's probably about it.
Okay.
But we continue to do programming all through the summer, so catch us there, and pretty soon it'll be football season.
We didn't get into any heated debates, but I promise you that will change the next time Mr. Barrientos is on the podcast, because
because off mic we have a lot of heated debates.
Yes.